My ex-husband got into a car accident and lost his memory. He turned into a 20-year-old boy again, his memories stopping precisely at the moment when he loved me the most. Julia. So 10 years later you're my wife? Ethan jumped off the hospital bed, shocked and ecstatic. He rushed over and hugged me tightly. This isn't a dream, right? Oh my God, my damn crush actually came true. I stood there stiffly in his arms, but inside me there was nothing left except desolation. Ethan, I said softly, you forgot. We got divorced last month. And besides, I added quietly, you were the one who cheated. Chapter 01. It was the Lunar New Year. Everyone else was celebrating, full of joy and good fortune. Only me, the ultimate sucker, was standing outside the Civil Affairs Bureau, waiting like an idiot. I waited the entire day. Even after the staff got off work, that brain-dead ex-husband of mine still hadn't shown up. Fuck. He was the one who asked for the divorce. The agreement was already signed, and now that it was time to go through the formalities, he pulled a disappearing act. Was that supposed to be funny? My eyes were practically shooting fire as I kept calling him. His phone stayed powered off the whole time. By the time it got dark and the Civil Affairs Bureau closed, it was obvious I wasn't getting divorced today. Dejected, I walked into the parking garage, ready to drive away. Just as I started the car, my phone rang. Hello, are you Mr. Ethan Hernandez's family member? This is the First People's Hospital. Mr. Hernandez has been in a car accident. Chapter 02. Fantastic. Not only did the divorce fail, I even got a scam call. Without hesitation, I said, yes, I'm Ethan's wife. Is he about to die? Don't waste medical resources, just give up treatment. Yes. My call. I'll take full responsibility. Just wheel him straight into the morgue. I clearly stunned the person on the other end. Mr. Hernandez only has a fractured leg. The doctor sounded young, clearly inexperienced in dealing with patients' families. His scalp practically tingled with panic. We've already set the bone and put on a cast. If it's convenient for you, could you come by? That sounded vague. I frowned, feeling something was off, but politely declined. No need. A fracture isn't a big deal, and I'm very busy. I won't be coming. Oh, he sounded a little disappointed, but then added, also, Mr. Hernandez was in the accident with Miss Lillian. We can't get in touch with Miss Lillian's family. Do you know her? The moment I heard that name, I perked up. I do. What happened to her? She's seriously injured, extensive bruising all over her body. There's a chance her hand will be permanently disabled, and she'll likely be left with severe scarring. I'm coming right now. I shouted in uncontrollable delight, practically euphoric. The First People's Hospital, right? Which floor? Which ward? I'll be there in 20 minutes. The doctor replied, we're at the second campus, 5th floor. I hung up before he could finish and slammed on the accelerator. The black SUV shot forward like a shark breaking through water, forcing its way into the bustling traffic. The moment I got that call, all the gloom in my heart vanished. Yes, my ex-husband broke his leg in a car accident. Who cared whether he lived or died? But the mistress getting disfigured in a car crash, possibly left disabled? That kind of good fortune doesn't come around often. How could I possibly miss a show like that? Chapter 03. When it came to Ethan Hernandez, I felt nothing at all, but the moment I heard that Lillian had been disfigured, I ran like my life depended on it. I didn't even wait for the elevator, wearing high heels. I climbed all 5 floors on foot. I was genuinely frantic, afraid I'd be too late. Even the doctors hadn't expected me to arrive so quickly. Beaming with delight, I burst into the ward, radiant and excited. Where's Lillian? How is her hand disabled? How big are the scars? Let me see. Let me see. Everyone in the room looked at me, their expressions awkward. I wasn't embarrassed at all. All I felt was pure joy. Where is she? Where is she? But the next second, the curtain around the hospital bed was pulled open. Ethan lay there with one leg encased in plaster. He stared at me, stunned, uncertain. My expression darkened instantly. But he looked at me, his voice trembling, confused and hesitant. You're Julia's older sister? I froze, puzzled. Then I let out a cold laugh. I'm your father. No one knew what nerve that sentence hit in Ethan Hernandez. He clutched his head, his face twisted in pain, and collapsed back onto the bed. The doctor pulled me out of the ward and explained. Mr. Hernandez has a concussion. His memory is disordered. He knows basic common knowledge. But when we asked his age, he said he was 20. I was absent-minded, barely listening. The doctor noticed and added tactfully. Miss Lillian is on the 6th floor. She's not completely out of danger yet. You can look at her through the glass. Without another word, I took off running. Everyone exchanged looks. When I actually reached the 6th floor and saw Lillian, I saw with my own eyes the mistress who had destroyed my marriage. Just days ago, she had been flaunting herself in front of me. Now she lay there wrapped in bandages, her right hand twisted into a strange claw. Her once delicate face, not a single patch of intact skin remaining. Out of humanitarian concern, I almost felt pity, but the moment I thought of everything she had done to me, that humanitarian concern vanished on the spot. I was no longer human. Chapter 04. When I returned to the 5th floor, I pulled out all the cash in my wallet and prepared to hand out red envelopes to everyone present. Yes, I wanted everyone to share in my happiness, and they truly did. The doctor's hand trembled slightly as he took the money. Miss, the patient's condition is somewhat complicated, and our medical facilities here are limited. I waved my hand grandly, full of reckless confidence. He thinks he's 20? Then he's 20. Doesn't matter. You treat him. If he ends up dead or disabled, I won't cause trouble. Everyone fell silent, choked by words. The ward was filled with doctors and nurses, and in the corner stood Ethan's secretary and lawyer. They were terrified of being noticed by me, twisting their bodies away, shrinking back as much as possible. I laughed. Ethan's treatment isn't something I get to decide. In the end, I took the initiative to clarify things for the doctor. Although the legal procedures aren't complete yet, we've already signed the divorce agreement. I can no longer act on his behalf. These are his assistant and his lawyer. I pointed toward the corner. The people I pointed at shuddered all over, unable to face me, shrinking back even more. Talk to them, I said. The secretary and lawyer could only nod obediently. Seeing them like this, I found it especially amusing. You helped with the divorce. Sure, but you're still just employees. I took out a cigarette and held it between my lips without lighting it, casually tucking loose strands of hair behind my ear. Instead, I was the one who smiled at them first. Don't be afraid to face me. I'm not a bad person. The secretary stood there awkwardly, wishing he could disappear. As for the lawyer, he looked young, somewhat stiff and old-fashioned. When I smiled at him, his composed, scholarly face actually turned red. His face flushed crimson, and even his thin metal-framed glasses could no longer uphold his elite image. He said to me, "You didn't have to come, mm." I was in a very good mood, relaxed and free. I'm about to leave anyway. The moment I said that, the curtain around the bed was yanked open. Ethan had just endured another wave of headache and regained consciousness. The secretary hurried over to him. The Hernandez CEO, whose memory was frozen at age 20, scanned the room, completely ignoring his trusted aides. He looked at me, dazed and disoriented. "Julia, how did you become like this? You look a bit older." I touched my face. Yes, it had been 10 years. Who wouldn't age? I wasn't about to argue with a potentially insane man, nor did I care to respond. I turned and walked away. Then a loud crash sounded behind me. Ethan had dragged himself out of bed on his plastered leg, lost his balance, and fell. He hit the ground and desperately crawled toward me, like a madman. "Julia, don't go!" The secretary rushed to help him up, but Ethan shoved him away. This Hernandez CEO, whose memories stopped at age 20, no longer recognized his own trusted subordinates. His face was filled with confusion, panic, and urgency. "I don't even know you people. I don't need you meddling. Julia, wait for me, take me with you." He lay on the floor, shouting toward the door, utterly alone, calling out to the only lifeline he believed he had left. "Don't abandon me." Chapter 05. I had already stepped out of the ward when I heard the commotion behind me. I turned back in genuine shock. Ethan Hernandez was the hottest rising star in tech. He had built everything from scratch, made his name young, and by 25 or 26 was already someone important. Anyone who met him would politely call him President Hernandez Jr. Along with fame came his reputation, harsh, aloof, difficult to approach, keeping everyone at arm's length. And now, this man was sprawled on the floor, dignity completely gone, desperately crawling toward me. I suddenly turned back, squatted down in front of him, and asked, "Do you really only recognize me? Who do you think I am?" Ethan reached out and grabbed my arm without hesitation. He was clearly terrified I might run again. This question, at least, he answered flawlessly. "You're Julia. You live next door to me. Your dad's name is Kevin. Your mom is a high school teacher. You're severely allergic to peanuts and seafood, if you eat even a little. Your whole body swells up immediately." That was all correct. The corner of my mouth twitched. "So, you think you're 20, right? Then think about it. When we were 20, we were sophomores in college. Look at your face now. Do you look like a male college student?" Ethan touched his face, then looked at me. Somehow, his face actually turned red. I was speechless. "I heard the doctor talking to you," I said. Ethan dragged his broken leg and sat on the floor. His expression was serious and solemn, but his eyes kept drifting nervously from side to side. "I know I'm not 20. The moment I saw you, I knew it. I must have hit my head and forgotten the past few years." He tightened his grip on my arm and finally said, You're my wife now." I said nothing. At that moment, I felt tired. Before coming here, I had already spent an entire day waiting at the Civil Affairs Bureau, watching countless couples get married and countless married couples part ways in bitterness. Standing there, I told myself that when I separated from Ethan, I absolutely could not end up like them, drowning in love, hate, resentment, and rage. At the very end, I had to remain dignified. I was someone who cared about appearances. What I hadn't expected was that this idiot Ethan would risk his life, recklessly jerking the steering wheel at high speed, crashing into a guardrail together with his mistress. So at that moment, I stood up, because Ethan was gripping my arm and refusing to let go. I had no choice but to pull him up with me. With one leg in a cast, Ethan could only stand on one foot. He stared at the secretary and the lawyer warily, like an injured animal separated from its pack. To get away, I pulled the secretary over and said to Ethan, "You are Ethan. You're 30 years old. You're currently the founder and CEO of Dawn Technology. This is your secretary and the company's legal counsel. You can trust them." Ethan looked at them and frowned. I smiled at him and said, "Even if you don't remember, congratulations, Ethan. By the time you turned 30, you really did make it big." But he just stared at me. "How many years have we been married?" he asked. I answered patiently. 5 years. Ethan calculated silently, his gaze drifting again. "We got together right after graduating college. So, do we have children?" I was silent for a moment. "Yes," I said calmly, "but at 4 months, we couldn't keep it." Ethan took a step back. The words pierced him like needles. He instinctively loosened his grip on my arm, his body starting to tremble. Yet he himself didn't understand where this sudden reaction came from. He stood there blankly, shaking violently. A sudden wave of pain assaulted him, tearing his heart apart, overwhelming him beyond his control. He clutched his head again, saying in agony, "Julia, I watched coldly, completely unmoved, until Ethan held his head and collapsed back down. With my hands in my pockets, I stood there watching him tremble as he fell onto the hospital bed, his features twisted, clutching his head, tears streaming down his face. Doctors and nurses rushed in to attend to him. Everyone else was caught off guard. In the chaos, I said to the secretary, "Please reschedule it. Make another appointment with the Civil Affairs Bureau. We'll go through the procedures again next Wednesday." The secretary looked at me in panic. He hesitated, unsure what to say, but I had already turned and walked away. Chapter 06. I got married when I was 25. It was neither early nor late, just in time for the poorest period of our lives. Back then, Ethan couldn't scrape together even 100 yuan from head to toe. All he could afford was a 58 yuan strawberry cake. He lit the candles and used that to propose to me. You couldn't call it simple. You could only say it was downright shabby. Other people's love stories usually end with flowers, diamond rings, and romantic dinners. All I had was that cake. We squeezed into a rented apartment, eating the cake until our faces were smeared with cream. The cake wasn't filling, so after that I went back into the kitchen and cooked instant noodles. The kitchen was tiny, filled with hot steam rising from the pot. Ethan suddenly walked in and said, "How about we get married?" I froze for a moment, then said, "Sure." That was it. After finishing the noodles, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau the next day, got our marriage certificate, and became a legally married couple. We had grown up next door to each other, childhood sweethearts. His heart matched mine. From ignorant youth, we walked together all the way to 30. There was no first love drama, no pretentious coquette, no goddess dropping out of the sky. We understood each other completely and fought side by side. Finally, in the year Ethan turned 30, his company secured several projects purely through technology. Investment poured in like a tidal wave. Riding that momentum, we made a complete comeback and became the city's new elite. Then, at 31, I caught Ethan cheating in bed. The marriage collapsed on the spot. It happened right there, in my own home. Ethan was sprawled on the bed, still drunk from the night before. When we burst in, he didn't even understand what was happening. I picked up a bottle of mineral water and dumped it straight onto his face. Lillian, wrapped in nothing but a towel, was blocked in the bathroom by my friends. One hero needs 3 helpers. Seeing so many of my people, she panicked. Her face drained of color. It was President Hernandez who asked me to accompany him. She sobbed softly. "I'm just an intern. How could I refuse my superior?" That was her level? My friend rolled her eyes on the spot. "If I'd known you had this kind of talent, I would have transferred you to the marketing department." I smiled at her, cold and sharp. "Our clients happen to like young girls. Since you don't know how to say no, you might as well go all the way and close a deal. The year-end bonus would be way more than 100,000. Lillian hadn't expected my thinking to be this twisted. She choked, completely stunned, seeing that I genuinely intended to make use of her worthlessness. Lillian could only clutch the towel, the only thing covering her, and weakly defend herself. My feelings for President Hernandez are genuine. What a low-level pretentious coquette. What an idiot. I was actually amused by her stupidity for a moment, until I couldn't laugh anymore, because Ethan wiped the water off his face, got dressed, calmly got out of bed, and asked me for a divorce. Yes, he wanted a divorce, ignoring the loss of shared assets, ignoring the impact on the company. He made up his mind. Within 3 months, he would take the wedding ring off my finger. In fact, that very night, he packed his things and moved out. I cried. I cursed. I smashed up the company office. But our marriage was already in complete ruins. The blow shattered my mental state. During the divorce negotiations, I was even stabbed in the back by his trusted secretary. The divorce agreement stated that the company had nothing to do with me, and I would only receive 1/3 of the shared assets. I couldn't believe it. But at that point, everything was already a mess beyond repair. When I finally accepted reality and agreed to the divorce, that idiot Ethan got into a car accident and lost his memory. Chapter 07. Ethan Hernandez really remembered nothing. All the experiences of these past years evaporated in an instant. With a single car accident, he truly achieved what people jokingly say, half a lifetime into the spotlight. And he returned as a boy. Company operations, business dealings, complicated messes, he couldn't understand any of it. The Hernandez CEO whose memory was frozen at age 20 could solve quadratic equations, but couldn't run a company. He sat there staring at the documents the secretary handed him, his mind completely blank. But he still remembered me. I myself can barely remember what I was like at 20, but 20-year-old Ethan was vivid beyond ignoring, especially because he only recognized me. Chapter 08. To be honest, after all these years, the one thing I truly did not expect was just how thick-skinned Ethan's trusted secretary could be. After all, back when Ethan and I were getting divorced, this guy had stabbed me in the back. That so-called right-hand man secretly helped Ethan transfer company shares, then used the board's administrative process to push me out, stripping me of management control and a large portion of my equity. I lost at least $50 million. Out of all the marital assets, I only got 1/3. Last time at the hospital, I'd merely been polite on the surface, some fake courtesy for appearance's sake. What I didn't expect was that he would actually take that as permission. This secretary had the nerve to bring Ethan straight to my place to block me. Because Ethan wanted to see me, the secretary used me as bait, coaxing this mentally underdeveloped CEO into putting on a respectable act and attending an important executive meeting. Then he fulfilled his promise by coming to corner me. Chapter 09. When they arrived, I was in the middle of moving. On the very day I caught Ethan cheating, he moved out of our shared home. With divorce imminent, there was no way I could continue living there either. A friend helped me find an apartment, and I completed the purchase last month. Most things were already set up, but I couldn't bear to part with the good furniture from that house, so I decided to move it as well. After all, none of it was cheap, and once there was a new woman in the house, she'd definitely replace everything. Since that was the case, I might as well take advantage of it myself. So when we met, the atmosphere was delicate. The secretary was awkward, after all. He'd caused me to lose so much money. I was also a little guilty because I was quietly moving marital fixed assets. This time, the secretary chose to strike first. He took the initiative and said to me, "Julia, you know how it is. I'm just an employee. Everyone serves their own master." President Hernandez gave me a chance when no one else would. In a matter like this, I couldn't afford to be soft. I rolled my eyes at him. Yes, gratitude, loyalty unto death. So I deserved to be screwed over? What he lost was just a boss. What I lost was a very real 50 million. The two of us whispered on the balcony, while over on the other side, Ethan had already finished touring the entire place. When he saw me and the secretary, one man, one woman, standing close together and talking quietly, he immediately grew uneasy and walked over to pull us apart. Pointing at the packed cardboard boxes, he asked me, "Is this our future home? I think this place is great. Why are we moving out? Or are we upgrading to something bigger and more luxurious?" I glanced at him. "I'm the one moving out. You're staying here." Ethan didn't understand. I said coldly, "Because last month we already agreed to divorce. The reason was that you cheated." Chapter 10. I completely failed to anticipate Ethan's reaction. After hearing that, he froze for a second, then burst out laughing, as if he just heard the most ridiculous joke in the world. He laughed so hard he nearly doubled over, his laughter loud and carefree. "Don't joke like that," 20-year-old Ethan said with a grin. "How could I possibly divorce you?" I looked at him calmly. "There's no banquet that doesn't end. Even you and I can part ways." "Impossible." He said it firmly, almost without thinking. "If you said we were never together, fine. But if we're married, there's no way I'd leave you." That made me want to laugh, because he had truly forgotten too much. He forgot the cruel, almost ruthless, completely one-sided property division that devastated me. He forgot the numb, indifferent expression on his face when he placed the divorce agreement in front of me. He forgot saying to me, with his own mouth, "Let it go. We'll both be free." This was Ethan with memories frozen at 20. He remembered nothing. He knew nothing. He blindly believed that as long as the future included me, we would end up together and never part. And in that moment, malice surged inside me. Why was it always me who got hurt? Always me who suffered? No, I wanted to hurt him too. I wanted him to feel pain. So I asked him instead, "Why? Why do you think we'll never separate?" Ethan looked at me. In that instant, the shadows of 20 and 30 overlapped within him, merging into one. Yet his gaze was unwavering, focused, sincere. He said to me seriously, "Because I liked you for so many years. After finally getting you, how could I ever let go?" Chapter 11. The moment he said that, the entire room fell silent. The secretary's expression completely collapsed. He couldn't understand how his amnesiac boss had suddenly turned into a full-blown love-struck idiot, passionately professing his feelings to his divorced ex-wife. And I said nothing, because 20-year-old Ethan really had liked me exactly the way he said. And those words were, admittedly, a bit too sentimental. After saying them, Even Ethan himself couldn't quite handle it. He hastily made up an excuse about checking out the kitchen and fled. The balcony was left empty and quiet, with only the secretary and me standing there. The secretary looked at my expression and didn't dare say a word. And really, what could he say? Congratulations. Our boss has fallen in love with you again? Or sorry, the boss is mentally compromised, but the divorce still has to proceed normally? Nothing could be said. Nothing would be appropriate, because this Ethan who loved me so openly was living 10 years in the past. The present Ethan had only temporarily forgotten the fractures between us. A dream, no matter how beautiful, is still just a bubble. Once he remembered, everything would be laid bare again. 20-year-old Ethan could give everything for me, but 30-year-old Ethan had long since burned through his love, leaving only mutual resentment between us. Even if, right now, those two versions briefly overlapped, our marriage was already beyond saving. Yet as I watched Ethan wandering aimlessly around the kitchen, I suddenly smiled. It was a light, gentle smile, like a spring breeze passing through. Or perhaps I was simply genuinely happy, as if I'd returned to the honeymoon phase. Maybe it was the sincerity of 20-year-old Ethan that moved me. Not only did I stop moving out, I even took the initiative to keep him for dinner, smiling brightly as I busied myself in the kitchen. Yes, the way I looked at him was also incredibly gentle, as if I were gazing at the person I loved most in the world. At first, Ethan seemed flattered and at a loss, but very quickly, he found the courage to accept it. After all, it was already 10 years later. We had been married for 5 years. We were husband and wife. What was wrong with sitting down to have a meal together? Watching his dazed, slightly giddy expression, my smile grew even warmer. An amnesiac Ethan was still Ethan. An Ethan whose memory was frozen at 20 was still Ethan. And since he was Ethan, he could amend legal documents. He could make voluntary gifts. Very good. I thought to myself, I know exactly how I'm going to get back the 50 million that rightfully belongs to me. Chapter 12. At the very beginning, when divorce was first put on the agenda, Ethan and I fought like lunatics. Truly insane. We fought as if the world were ending, because the company had been built by the two of us together. And once it came time to split, the entire structure was thrown into chaos. Even the employees were forced to take sides. As for Lillian, being the final straw that broke the camel's back, she instantly became like a rat crossing the street. But once I was stabbed in the back and lost control of the company, everything changed completely. Reality has a way of forcing people's hands. What happened to my marriage was, in the end, my own business. No matter how unfair the employees felt on my behalf, they still had families to support. They couldn't risk their paychecks for me. So even though everyone looked down on Lillian's behavior, they tacitly accepted her as the future boss's wife. Lillian herself probably thought the same. Until today, when Ethan walked into the company holding my hand, everyone was stunned. 20-year-old Ethan was at the age when he loved me the most. Even though I was no longer the equally youthful girl in his memory, no school uniform, no ponytail, he still threw himself fully into loving me again. I was no longer the naive girl I once was. Over the years, I had weathered storms both shocking and brutal. Coupled with how well I knew him, it was effortless for me to make him completely captivated, obsessed, and hopelessly devoted to me. No one had expected things to turn out like this, but most of the company employees were genuinely happy for us. Many of them were veterans from our startup days. They had personally witnessed us fighting side by side, climbing step by step to where we were. When our marriage later fell apart, they had sincerely felt regret for us. Now, seeing us reconciled, they truly felt it was a good thing. But not everyone was happy. That person was the secretary. He joined the company relatively late, so what he first saw was Ethan and me at our worst. Now, he watched helplessly as amnesiac Ethan circled around me like a complete sucker, desperately acting as my simp. In the secretary's eyes, his boss had merely hit his head and temporarily lost his mind. At the same time, the secretary was extremely wary of me, afraid I would deceive his mentally compromised boss and do something that harmed his interests. So he attempted to offer Ethan some painfully blunt, unwelcome advice. Ethan smiled faintly, then immediately flew into a rage, slammed the table, and kicked the secretary out of the office on the spot. They almost came to blows. Chapter 13. What the secretary wanted to say was actually very simple, condensed into one sentence. It was basically, "Boss, that woman is no good." Ethan's current way of thinking was even simpler than his. If Julia is no good, then what does that make you? Ethan's veins bulged on his forehead. His face flushed red as he roared in the office, completely unconcerned with appearances. He was truly furious. "I've known Julia for so many years. We grew up as neighbors, do you understand that? When I was 16, my parents ran off because of debt. I couldn't even afford tuition. It was Julia who supported me with all her allowance. She skipped breakfast every day just so I could eat." Ethan was so angry he was almost losing his mind, his eyes bloodshot as he shouted. Julia's family wasn't rich either. If her parents found out, they'd definitely blame her for meddling. And she cried and begged them anyway, begged them to help me, begged them to give me a chance. At this point, Ethan clenched his back teeth so hard the muscles in his face stood out. Yet tears streamed down his face. Through tears, he said, "On what grounds do you all get to tell me she's not a good person? In this world, she's the one who's been the best to me. I only have her. When I was 16, my mom handed me over to debt collectors. They wanted to chop off my hand, and Julia knelt down and begged them. You say now that Julia's only nice to me because she wants my company. If there were no Julia, how could I possibly have the company I have today? My things, they should all go to her." The secretary had coffee splashed all over him. Looking utterly miserable, I stood quietly outside the office, listening to the shouting inside. Employees passing by heard everything. Their expressions were complicated. They couldn't help sneaking glances at me, as if watching the heroine of a tragedy, because they all remembered how, during the divorce, Ethan and I had fought so violently it shook the entire company. Now this brain-injured Ethan was inside, raging with love as deep as the sea. Yet when he had been clear-headed, in this very same place, he had shown me no mercy at all, cutting me down without hesitation. No matter how deep young love once was, this was the end of it. I said nothing. Chapter 14. Ethan was about to explode again when I knocked on the door, drawing everyone's attention. It's already noon. I smiled at him. "What do you want to eat?" "I'm a little hungry." The moment he heard that, Ethan instantly abandoned both his rage and his well-meaning but annoying secretary. He rushed over to me and pulled me outside. "Then let's go eat right now," he said. "You always skip breakfast. You must be feeling awful by now." "It's fine." I gently held his hand and said softly. "They were just worried about you." "Why get so angry?" That was the wrong thing to say. The moment I mentioned it, Ethan exploded again. "Do you know what they said?" he snapped. "They said you're after my money, you want to steal my company." I smiled sweetly. My eyes curved gently, and even raised my hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead. "And what if that's really what I want?" I asked. "Then I'll give you everything." Ethan blurted it out without hesitation. "You're Julia. If you want something from me, how could I not give it to you?" Hearing that, my smile grew even brighter. I even took the initiative to hug him. "I know," I whispered by his ear. "Ethan, you treat me better than anyone." The moment he heard that, Ethan practically floated, beaming with joy. He dragged me toward the company exit, loudly insisting we go eat something good. I let him have his way, but I quietly took out my phone and sent a message to my lawyer. The message was simple. "Is the contract I asked for ready?" As expected of a seasoned professional, the lawyer didn't ask a single question and replied immediately. "It's ready. No issues at all. We can sign this afternoon." Seeing that reply, I put my phone away, the weight finally lifting from my heart. Who knew when Ethan's brain might suddenly recover? The longer it dragged on, the more dangerous it became, whether in business or in marriage. Only the one who strikes first gets the last laugh. Chapter 15. Ethan thought that the me in my 30s was mature, gentle, and just a little sexy. The years had changed me a lot, but when I smiled at him, he still felt that I was his Julia. As for the blank years he couldn't remember, Ethan was extremely curious, clinging to me and asking about everything. I was very patient and answered him one by one. At the very beginning, we ran street stalls and made our first pot of gold. You bought a broken machine from a scrap dealer. tinkered with it until you fixed it. And we used it to produce pirated music tapes. We set up stalls all over the city. Later the business got too good and too big. So we simply recruited a group of distributors and just supplied them with goods. In the first week alone, we made $50,000. In the elegantly decorated restaurant, I took a sip of lemon water. I continued gently. But that kind of business has its own turf bosses. We barged in recklessly and broke their rules. Back then, a lot of people showed up at our place with steel pipes and machetes. We had no choice but to hand over most of the money before they were willing to leave. I was terrified at the time, crying my eyes out. But I was also afraid they'd really cut off your hand. So even while shaking all over, I still stood in front of you. Ethan believed every word. Because I was Julia. Those were exactly the kinds of things I would have done for him. He trusted me the way he trusted himself. As I spoke, I had already cut the steak on my plate and passed it over to him. Gentle, considerate, emotionally attentive. And so, he became more and more convinced that there was no way we had divorced. How could he possibly have divorced me? After all those years of standing shoulder to shoulder through storms and hardship, and especially when our feelings had been rock solid from the very beginning. We had spent so many years together. To tell him that one day we would grow to resent each other, blame each other, despise each other, and curse each other. How could he ever believe that? How absurd. I glanced at my phone. My lawyer had already arrived at the company. I immediately put down my knife and fork, saying that I was full, that there was some work I hadn't finished, and that I needed to go back to the office to deal with it. Ethan was extremely considerate of me. Without hesitation, he quickly finished his steak. What kind of work is so urgent that you can't even eat properly? I'll go back and help you with it. You can help, I said softly. It does need your signature. Ethan didn't think twice. He didn't even look. He waved his hand grandly, without a second thought. As long as I can take some burden off you, I'll do anything you want. Chapter 16. What do you call this? You call it heaven helping me. I spoke softly, checked on him constantly, and clung tightly to Ethan's arm. When crossing the street, I looked left and right, stood there observing for a full 5 minutes before daring to take him across. When taking the elevator, I even made sure he kept a 1-meter distance from everyone else. I was terrified that something unexpected might happen midway, that something might hit his head and turn him back into that bastard of a man, ruining my whole plan. The lawyer had been waiting in my office for a long time, rubbing his hands together, fully prepared. Several contracts were laid out neatly in a straight line. We had also prepared recording and video equipment, an entire set, to prevent him from going back on his word afterward. Seeing this setup, Ethan didn't quite understand what was happening, but he could read the words on the contracts. Terms like gift, transfer, voluntary waiver left him confused. He asked me, "What is all this for?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, I gently cupped his face. I asked him softly, "Are you willing to give everything you have to me?" Ethan opened his mouth to answer, but a sharp pain suddenly exploded in his head. The pain made him dizzy. He could barely stand. He fumbled his way into a chair, clutching his head as if it were splitting apart. But I didn't let him go. I asked again, "Are you willing to give your things to me?" Ethan's headache was unbearable. Still, he gritted his teeth and answered, "Everything I have can be yours. If it weren't for you, I would have died long ago. Everything I have should belong to you." I exchanged a glance with the lawyer. The lawyer immediately went to work. There were many places requiring signatures. The lawyer had already professionally and thoughtfully marked them in advance, flipping through the pages briskly and guiding Ethan where to sign. Ethan was in so much pain he felt faint and nauseous, but with just a few soothing words, I managed to calm him. I even kissed him on the face. That did it. It was like he'd been injected with adrenaline. He ignored the headache, ignored the dizziness. Without even looking, he grabbed the pen and signed rapidly. One person flipping pages, one person signing. The efficiency was astonishing. Watching this, I felt deeply satisfied. The last time we went through something like this, Ethan and I had nearly come to blows on the spot. Just signing the words agreement divorce had dragged on for a full month. This time, Ethan finished signing all the contracts in 5 minutes. The lawyer quickly adjusted the recording and video equipment, then took out the prepared statement and asked Ethan to read it aloud. Ethan's head felt like it was about to split open, but he didn't want to disappoint me, and even less did he want to make me sad. He clenched his teeth and forced himself through it. It was almost over, and everything was going far too smoothly, smooth to an unbelievable degree. Very soon, I would reclaim my assets, my company, my shares, and Ethan would be left with nothing. And then, the tightly locked office door was smashed open with a fire axe. Chapter 17. The scene was genuinely terrifying. Wood splinters flew everywhere as the door was smashed open by brute force. Those of us inside were completely stunned. When we looked up, sure enough, it was Ethan's trusted secretary, arriving like a knight to rescue his master. The moment the secretary saw the table full of contracts and the recording equipment set up around the room, he went berserk. He knew it. This woman was no good. Back when the divorce exploded into chaos, my madness, my hatred, anyone with eyes could tell there was no possibility of reconciliation left. And now suddenly I changed my face, smiling sweetly, acting gentle and tender? Of course there was an ulterior motive. The secretary immediately broke down the door and charged in, determined to stop everything. Ethan's head felt like it was splitting apart. Even so, he forced himself upright and stood in front of me protectively, shouting, "What are you doing here?" That nearly drove the secretary insane. He pointed at me frantically and yelled, "Boss, she's lying to you. She's scamming your money." Ethan rolled his eyes instinctively, but his head hurt so badly that the motion twisted his face in pain. Seeing that his boss was clearly no longer in a usable state, the secretary grew desperate. Fortunately, he'd come prepared. He flung the office door open wider and pushed in a woman in a wheelchair. "Boss, do you remember her? This is Lillian," the secretary shouted. "She's the woman you're with now." Lillian had clearly been rushed straight from the hospital. She was still wearing a patient gown. Her injuries hadn't healed at all, bandages and gauze wrapped messily around her body, and her right hand was curled into a grotesque, deformed shape, so she really was disabled. The moment Ethan heard that, his headache vanished, his voice grew louder, and his temper flared. Because he was furious, he pointed at Lillian and snapped, "Are you insane? I ditched Julia for her." That sentence was brutally cruel. Lillian glanced timidly at Ethan. It was true that she had deliberately seduced him and taken advantage of the situation. And it was also true that Ethan Hernandez had never really respected her. But hearing those words still hurt her. Tears streamed down her face as she said, "President Hernandez, my feelings for you are genuine." This mistress was truly low tier. So stupid it was almost impressive. She kept repeating the same line over and over. I'd heard it so many times my ears were numb. Ethan looked as if he'd just heard something utterly ridiculous. He even voiced the question out loud, in front of everyone, under countless staring eyes. He sneered and pointed at me. "I've known Julia for over 10 years. We've been married for 5. We've shared hardship together. You're telling me I'd divorce Julia for this kind of woman? Do you think I'd believe that? Am I some kind of dumbass? What is she, exactly, that she could even be compared to Julia?" But strangely, the moment those words left his mouth, the entire room fell silent. Yes. Ethan's question was sharp, painfully sharp, and it hit the core of the truth. After knowing each other for so long, after love forged like steel, would we really fall apart over a low-level pretentious coquette? Over someone as foolish as Lillian? No. The truth was, long before that, the problems between us had already begun. And once spilled, water cannot be gathered back again. Chapter 18. The secretary opened his mouth. He couldn't answer that question, and long before he had smashed the door, I had already made a phone call. The head of the company's security department was a relative of mine. In no time at all, a swarm of security guards rushed in like wolves. They grabbed the secretary and Lillian, twisted their arms behind their backs, and shoved them out. Thanks to those 10 minutes they bought me at the very end, the lawyer immediately switched into full professional mode and led Ethan through the entire remaining process. When the final bright red fingerprint was pressed down, it was finally done. Everything was settled. I had my money back. I gathered up the contracts and the USB drives containing the audio and video recordings and locked them into the safe. In a moment, that safe would be deposited at the bank. beyond anyone's reach. The copies would stay with the lawyer, who would continue handling the remaining procedures so that I could fully reclaim everything that was rightfully mine. Money, equity, the company, all of it was mine by right. 20-year-old Ethan was young, but he wasn't stupid. After going through that entire process, he had already understood what I was trying to do. And yet, he still cooperated. Just as he said, he sincerely believed these things belonged to me, because I was Julia. So if I asked him for something, he would give it to me. Still, there was one thing he couldn't help wondering, with hesitation on his face. He asked me, was that woman just now really my mistress? How could I have chosen her? He sounded as if he'd heard something absurd. I already had you. How could I possibly look for someone like her? You forgot, I said. Everything was already over. I couldn't be bothered to lie to him anymore. I told him plainly. We were finished a long time ago. Huh? I thought about it for a moment, probably starting from the time my child was gone. I looked at him calmly and said, Ethan, do you remember? My child was killed by your father. Chapter 19. That was the first step in the destruction of our relationship. But even before that child, the conflicts between us had already become razor sharp. Once upon a time, Ethan had a very happy, complete family. His father was a businessman. His mother was a music teacher who played the piano. Their home was wealthy, warm, and harmonious. Ethan's mother would sit by the window playing the piano, while Ethan and his father played games in the living room. That scene was etched into his memory forever. But then, everything was gone. When Ethan was 16, his father's investments failed, leaving him buried in debt. Ethan's mother chose to divorce him. The family collapsed. His father fled overnight, and Ethan's mother, no longer protected by marriage, yet still being chased by creditors, panicked at the critical moment and pushed Ethan forward to take responsibility. She broke down, screaming that she was already divorced. He still has a son, doesn't he? Go find his son. All the problems landed squarely on Ethan's shoulders. To force Ethan's father to come back, the creditors threatened to cut off one of Ethan's hands. His father never returned. What happened afterward doesn't need to be told. I became the most important person in Ethan's life. The two of us supported each other, leaned on each other, weathered storms together, and only then made it this far. On the day Ethan's startup finally began to show success, his father came back. Over the years, his father had suffered greatly. When he returned, he was even limping on one leg. Ethan's mother had already remarried many years ago. She now had a new, happy family and another child. By all logic, Ethan's family was, in a sense, whole again. One of his long-standing regrets had been mended. But at that very moment, his family also faced a major problem. An investor's daughter had struck up an easy rapport with Ethan. They talked constantly, grew close, and she quietly fell for him. If we seized that opportunity, our company could go public directly. A carp leaping over the Dragon Gate. Nothing more dramatic than that. Ethan's father was a businessman, and businessmen are gamblers. Faced with a bet that promised only gains and no losses, he was desperate for his son to seize the opportunity. But Ethan had already secretly married me. The reason our marriage wasn't made public was purely for the convenience of our work. To the outside world, Ethan was a high-potential stock, young, exceptional, and bound to soar sooner or later. Who wouldn't want to secure such a premium asset? For all these years, both Ethan's mother and father had felt deeply guilty toward their son, especially after being tempered by the brutal ups and downs of the business world. Ethan had suffered a great deal, taking both visible and invisible hits. He became taciturn, cold, strict, and difficult to approach. By contrast, being with him changed me. I became smoother, more worldly, more flexible and pragmatic. Our partnership was, by all rights, a very good one. But the olive branch extended by that investor was even better. It could push us straight into a higher social and economic class. Ethan's parents, of course, knew about the many years of deep feelings between Ethan and me. They just didn't know that we were already married. So privately, they talked to me several times, hoping I would give up on Ethan. When emotions ran high, Ethan's mother even used her own experience as an example. She said that when Ethan's father went bankrupt, He divorced her immediately so as not to drag her down. Now, she felt that I should do the same, that I shouldn't hold Ethan back. How can someone stop the person they love from moving toward a better future? At that time, I had just finished an intense project. I'd been working insane overtime for days, utterly exhausted, dull-eyed, and drained. I sat in front of them with a stiff smile that didn't reach my eyes. I'm not stopping him from moving towards someone better, I said. I'm stopping him from committing bigamy. They never saw that coming, and I didn't hesitate at all. I took out my phone and showed them a photo of our marriage certificate. A complete, crushing victory. Ethan is great, I continued calmly. But there are plenty of great, high-quality men out there. Even if he divorces me now and takes a gamble, he'll still be a divorced man. There's no guarantee people will want him. And this company was built by both of us. If I leave, I'm taking half of it with me. That shut down every possible path. Ethan's parents could only stare at each other, speechless. And from that moment on, they developed resentment toward me. Ethan loved me deeply, but I was not the daughter-in-law they wanted. All these years, Ethan and I had been together through life and death. Every charge into battle had my share in it. From the bottom of my heart, I believed that I wasn't just Ethan's wife. I was his most important comrade in arms. No matter where we were, I deserved a position equal to his. But Ethan's parents were traditional people. In their worldview, men were superior to women. The husband made money. The wife served the family and revolved around the household. They didn't approve of me. On the contrary, they grew even more dissatisfied. After the incident with the investor's daughter, they felt I had ruined Ethan. And what business did I, a woman, have being so eager to do business anyway? Wasn't I just trying to snatch what belonged to their son? Every single day at home was filled with arguments. Ethan's parents argued with me. Ethan argued with them. Ethan and I argued with each other. Then my parents joined the battlefield. It never ended. My parents believed that after following Ethan for so many years, I had already endured every hardship imaginable. My father cursed furiously. You two abandoned your own son back then and ran off. What right do you have to show your faces now? But Ethan's parents didn't see it that way. Instead, they became even more determined to discipline me, to mold me into a gentle, considerate wife, to make me willingly hand over my half of the company to Ethan, to trap me inside the family, and to keep me out of social and professional competition altogether. The family crisis lasted for 3 or 4 years. No matter how good a relationship is, it can't withstand that kind of grinding. But then, one day, a turning point arrived. Because I got pregnant. It was an unexpected pregnancy. I didn't want the child at first. At that time, Ethan and I had already entered a cold war. Ethan's mother had heart disease, and he believed I shouldn't have been so forceful toward her. After I became pregnant, Ethan's parents spared no effort trying to force me back into the family, forcing me to give up my career, my work, and everything I had. I refused. In the end, they chose the most extreme method. One day after work, I took the elevator down to level B2 of the company parking garage, preparing to drive home. Suddenly, a group of people rushed out. They threw a bag over my head and grabbed me, trying to shove me into a car. I had been in business for many years. Retaliation and revenge were nothing new to me. Without hesitation, I pulled out pepper spray and a stun gun from my bag and fought back on the spot. In the struggle, Ethan's father slapped me hard across the face. Blood poured from my nose. I fell backward heavily onto the ground, my vision flashing white. Yes, I lay there in utter disgrace, unable to move. When I regained some awareness, I realized those people had all frozen in place. Every one of them was staring at me in fear. Their hats and masks had been torn off, revealing their true faces. They were Ethan's relatives, and I was lying on the ground, blood flowing between my legs. Even though I was rushed to the hospital, the child was still gone. Just like that. Gone. My parents completely lost it. They had never been this angry in their lives. I was their only child. Back when I got together with Ethan, who had nothing, I endured endless hardship. When we got married, there wasn't even a diamond ring. They were already deeply dissatisfied with Ethan. So after the incident, my parents immediately called the police. No hesitation. They pulled the surveillance footage and insisted on sending Ethan's father to prison. At that moment, Ethan knelt down and begged my parents to show mercy. Fine. I'll let you go. My mother sat by my hospital bed, holding my hand, tears streaming down her face. Then why didn't your parents let my daughter go? What did my daughter do wrong? She was so young, and she suffered so much just to be with you. You begged me to spare your parents, but when they were beating my daughter, where were you? Every word pierced the heart. My parents went mad with rage. No one could persuade them. They pressed charges against Ethan's father without wavering and refused any reconciliation. In the end, he was convicted of intentional injury. Ethan's father went to prison. Ethan couldn't face me anymore, and he could no longer face my parents either. Because of this, our feelings faded. Years of endless arguments, daily mutual torment, not to mention that his father still hasn't been released from prison. How could we stay together? How could we face each other? How could we ever go back to how things were? A mirror once shattered becomes thousands of fragments. Even if a god descended to the world, it could never be restored to its original state. I hated Ethan. I hated his parents. I had received higher education. Ethan's company was built with my blood and sweat too. I fought in the business world, took losses, got set up, endured humiliation. Why should a single word from his parents force me to hand everything over and retreat back into the household? I am not that kind of person. I was never that kind of person. How could a woman who, at 16, stood up to loan sharks possibly be weak and easy to bully? Ethan wasn't the only one with backbone. There was fire in my bones too, wind, blades, and ferocity. But my fierceness only escalated everything further. I refused to bow my head. I refused to forgive. In the end, we lost the child. Ethan lost his father once again. We blamed each other. We resented each other. So we fought, cursed, screamed, red-faced and furious. Our love withered away step by step, until the day I caught Ethan cheating in bed. At that moment, all I felt was relief. Trapped in that torturous relationship, I was already exhausted. Now that an outsider had entered, everything finally collapsed completely. Our marriage had finally reached its end. Of course, I never imagined that one day in my life, I would see the young Ethan again, that I would see the person who loved me the most. Because when we were young, we never knew that one day we would end up like this. But everything had already become irreversibly lost. Chapter 20. Facts proved that striking first was absolutely the right move, because right after I emptied out all of Ethan's assets, Lillian completely lost her mind. She couldn't tolerate being publicly humiliated by Ethan like that. And even more so, she couldn't accept ending up with a man who had nothing left. After scheming for so long, was this really what she had done it all for? Ethan's head was splitting with pain. In a daze, he went out, preparing to go to the hospital. Lillian was also heading back to the hospital. The secretary was driving. The two of them sat in the back seat. No one spoke, watching Ethan sit there, dazed and miserable. Lillian suddenly snapped. The hatred inside her boiled over. And so, she reached out, flung open the car door on Ethan's side, and shoved him out. The car was still moving when the door suddenly opened, and there was deliberate force behind it. The speed wasn't very fast, but Ethan was completely unprepared and slammed hard onto the road. Luckily, there weren't many cars around, or he would have been crushed under the wheels. Even so, his head smashed violently into the roadside greenery. Have you lost your mind? The secretary slammed on the brakes. Heart pounding, he roared. Madam only asked you to ruin their relationship and force a divorce, not to kill him. Meanwhile, Lillian sat in the back seat, laughing hysterically, completely unhinged. She laughed wildly and screamed. That old woman asked you to kick Julia out of the company. Did you manage to do that? She was insane. All of them were insane. The secretary jumped out of the car to save him. Ethan lay limp beside the roadside landscaping, his body slack, a pool of blood spreading beneath his head. Alive or dead, no one knew. Chapter 21. I had just finished placing the safe into bank custody. Then I received another call from the hospital. Last time, Ethan had driven into a guardrail. This time, he'd smashed his head into a hedge. Honestly, impressive, and also incredibly stupid. I didn't want to go, but the secretary's relentless barrage of calls drove me insane. In the end, I went. I thought to myself that maybe 20-year-old Ethan was hard to deal with, and that I needed to go to the hospital to reassure him. So when I hurried there and prepared to comfort him, the curtain was pulled back, and I saw a pair of calm, exhausted eyes. I froze on the spot. Ethan lay on the hospital bed, his head wrapped in thick bandages. I stood a short distance away. For a moment, I didn't move, and I didn't speak, because between the two of us, there had been nothing left to say for a long time now. Finally, I spoke politely. "President Hernandez, long time no see." He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with those calm, weary eyes. "Focus on your recovery," I said courteously. "Next Wednesday, the Civil Affairs Bureau. Don't let anything go wrong again." Chapter 22. Lillian was arrested. That was something I truly hadn't expected. Her moment of madness led to a police investigation, and in the process, professionals reconstructed the dashcam footage from Ethan's previous car accident. The footage captured their argument. Lillian hysterical, Ethan dismissive, and it also revealed an important truth to me. Lillian had been planted by Mrs. Hernandez. She was the daughter of Mrs. Hernandez's close friend, sent with a single purpose, to squeeze me out and take my place as Mrs. Hernandez. The secretary, too, had been hired by Mrs. Hernandez. Him stabbing me in the back had been premeditated, but Lillian was unstable. On the highway, she had reached out and grabbed Ethan's steering wheel. At high speed, the car swerved, slammed straight into the guardrail, and then flipped over. Lillian was on the right side. She was badly injured, and this time, she lost control again, successfully sending herself straight to prison. After hearing all this, my feelings were complicated. Parents who claim to love their child, I thought, can really treat someone else's daughter as less than human for the sake of their own son. Maybe President Hernandez just doesn't have much luck with women. At that moment, we were standing at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, documents in hand, waiting for our number to be called. I said sarcastically, "The women you run into all seem a little unhinged, either crazy about work, or crazy about love. You should be more careful in the future. Find someone gentle, domesticated, and pleasing to your parents. I just don't know which unlucky girl will end up marrying into your family and working like an ox or a horse." Ethan's head injury hadn't healed yet. Thick layers of bandages were still wrapped around it. He looked a bit ridiculous, almost like an Indian man. Inside the Civil Affairs Bureau, there were people getting married and people getting divorced. Laughter, anger, tears, nothing was ever in short supply. My biting sarcasm barely registered as anything special. He looked at me, calm, tired, yet vaguely dazed. No one knew what was going through his mind. Maybe he really had hit his head too hard. Suddenly, he asked me, "Do you hate me?" I shot back, "Don't you hate me?" He shook his head. "I don't." I smiled. "Then thank you," I said sincerely. "After all, you're the one walking away with nothing." And then, something I never could have anticipated happened. Ethan looked down at the marriage certificate in his hand and suddenly reached out to hold my hand. His tone softened. Carefully, almost pleadingly, he asked, "Can we not get divorced? Can we start over?" That was it. His head really was damaged. My gaze sharpened slightly. "Did you lose your memory again?" "No, Julia," he said. When I thought I was about to die, everything from the past replayed in front of my eyes like a carousel. "I was the one who wronged you. Can we start over?" Faced with his request, I didn't answer. Instead, I asked him, "Do you know what I was thinking when you got into that car accident?" Ethan shook his head, indicating that he didn't know. "At that time, I was sitting right there," I said, pointing to a corner of the Civil Affairs Bureau. "I waited for you for 4 or 5 hours, but you never came. Do you know? When I heard that you'd lost your memory because of the accident, I was thinking, why didn't you just die?" Ethan's whole body stiffened. I laughed. "If you had died in that car accident, I would have inherited all your property, and no one would think I was pitiful. If you had died back then, that would have been the best ending. You ask me whether I hate you? How could I not hate you? I'm 30 years old. You kicked me out of the company. I lost my career. I lost my family. I wasted half my life suffering for nothing. Your parents humiliated me and hurt me, and you did the same. You slept with other women at home, in our marital home. You ask me whether I hate you? I wish you would die immediately. I burst out laughing so hard that tears streamed down my face. I didn't even know what I was laughing at. Maybe I was laughing at his stupidity, at his delusion that things could still turn back. Ethan stood there, unable to say a single word, until the bright red marriage certificate was taken from our hands and the divorce certificate was issued. I felt completely satisfied. As I was leaving, I got into my car and saw that he was still standing there. Suddenly, I turned my head back and said to him, "If you really can't get over it, you can hate me. I've already changed. I don't need your love anymore. Getting your money is good enough. I took a larger share of the marital property. That's what you owe me. If you don't accept it, go ahead and sue me." Those words made Ethan's entire body tremble. He looked at me as if the 20-year-old Ethan and the 30-year-old Ethan were overlapping, but his lips were shaking, and he looked utterly desolate. When we were 20, our love was unbreakable. When we were 30, we were still very wealthy. Now, he had lost everything. From this moment on, I would leave him completely. He stood where he was, watching me drive away, without turning his head even once. So be it. The story isn't long, nor is it hard to tell. We met once, loved, and failed to be together. In the future, he will head toward his own destiny, and I will go on with my life. The greatest regret in this world is that we once had a good beginning, but never managed a proper farewell. Even though, many years ago, when we were still young, we once believed that we could walk together across mountains and rivers, side by side.